burn the widow's school register. Lord Marlowe ordered and dropped the names of 40 children into the fire. If the book vanished, Clara Fenwick would be blamed for stealing their grain and sent to prison. But instead of begging, the widow thrust her bare hand into the flames and dragged out the scorched binding. Then she placed a freshly split wooden counter beside it. The Duke of Wexford had arrived, prepared to judge her. One look at the matching notch changed his expression. "Constable," he said quietly, "do not touch her." Clara faced Lord Marlowe. "Then tell us, my lord, why did the only man who could prove this disappear?" Walter read the first page without inviting either man inside. The demand came from Voss Arrow Holdings, the company that had sold him the trailer the previous afternoon during the liquidation of its old racing division. It called the fixture a proprietary chassis alignment system and described Walter's possession as accidental. Yet, the bill of sale in Walter's shirt pocket said something simpler. He had bought the trailer as is and where is, with all permanently attached fixtures and all contents not listed on the exclusion schedule. The exclusion schedule named radios, data loggers, fire bottles, and one antique steering wheel. It did not name the fixture under the floor. The lawyer, Nathan Cole. I looked past Walter toward the open shop door. "Mr. Mercer, this isn't a $900 windfall. Ms. Voss is giving you an opportunity to correct an obvious mistake before it becomes expensive." Walter folded the demand once. "Your client had 3 months to inventory what she sold. I had a flashlight and 20 minutes. Cole's face tightened. He told Walter that a court order would arrive by the end of the day. That any cutting, measuring, photographing, or moving of the fixture could be treated as destruction of trade secrets, and that the security man would document the condition of the property from the doorway. Walter stepped sideways and blocked the view. He had spent 43 years measuring steel by thousandths of an inch. He knew the difference between caution and surrender. "You can stand on the county road," he said. "You can't photograph the inside of my building." The lawyer left the demand on a welding table and walked back to the vehicles. Before the first engine started, Walter made the decision that launched the fight. He closed the shop, sent his 2 employees home with pay, called the sheriff's non-emergency number to record that no one had permission to enter, and moved the trailer behind the locked interior gate. Then he called his son, Cal, and said, "Bring the auction packet. Bring every page." The trailer had looked worthless when Walter saw it in the back row of the Voss Arrow liquidation yard outside Mooresville, North Carolina. Its aluminum skin was blistered white. The rear door hung low, and water had rotted the black plywood deck. The auctioneer had described it as a 1998 club racing transporter, suitable for scrap or farm storage. No one bid at $800. Walter raised his card at $9. He needed a dry mobile bench for trackside repairs. And even after tires and roof seams, the axles alone justified the price. Claire Voss had watched the sale from beneath a white canopy. At 54, she controlled a software logistics fortune and the remains of Voss Arrow Racing, the team her father had built before she was born. She wore no diamonds and made no speeches. She was liquidating an operation that had lost its sponsor, its senior mechanics, and nearly $6 million in 2 seasons. Walter had seen strain in the way she kept checking the list in her hand. He had also seen impatience. When the auctioneer asked whether the trailer transferred with everything in it, Claire had told him, "If it isn't tagged for removal, it goes." That sentence mattered now. Walter and Cal had towed the trailer to Mercer Race Fabrication before dark. Cal was 36, broad-shouldered like his father, but faster in speech and more comfortable with computers. He ran customer estimates, ordered tubing, and drove the shop's old pickup when Walter's right knee stiffened. The shop had survived on roll cage repairs, vintage race restorations, and small production work. It had not survived comfortably. A $280,000 balloon payment on the building came due in 7 weeks. Walter had not told Cal how little remained in the reserve account. They found the first clue while removing the wet floor. Most of the plywood lifted in black flakes. Beneath the third sheet, Cal's pry bar struck a solid crossmember where no crossmember belonged. They cleared more wood and exposed a rectangle of heavy steel, 22 feet long, set low between the trailer rails. 4 adjustable towers lay folded within it. Each tower had a tapered locating pin, hand ground flat on one side. Walter stopped breathing for a moment when his work light crossed those pins. His father, Eli Mercer, had ground lacing pins that way because he had lost the tip of his left index finger in a stamping press in 1968. A conventional round pin was hard for him to turn with gloves, so he machined one narrow flat that his thumb could find by touch. Walter had copied the habit during his apprenticeship and abandoned it only when modern fixtures went to removable cartridges. The flat itself proved nothing. Hundreds of craftsmen modified tools. The sequence of flats did. Left, right, right, left, each aligned toward the center line. Exactly as Eli had drawn them in the notebook, Walter kept locked at home, under the forward tower, nearly buried in sealant. Walter found 3 stamped groups, VXP1, VXP2, and VXP3. Beside them were the letters ELM, driven lightly into the steel with individual hand stamps. Eli's full name had been Elijah Lewis Mercer. Cal wanted to take photographs. Walter told him to wait until they had the bill of sale in front of them. They did not lift a tower, loosen a bolt, or scrape away more coating. They covered the opening with clean plastic and locked the building. That restraint was why the lawyer's accusation the next morning angered Walter more than the demand itself. He had handled the discovery like evidence before anyone told him it was valuable. Cal arrived 10 minutes after the security vehicles left. He placed the auction packet, payment receipt, and tow release on the office table. The packet contained 43 lots. Lot 37 was the trailer, identified by vehicle number and title. Its description included permanently installed cabinets, winch, generator housing, and interior fittings. A clause near the back transferred all right. Title and interest the seller possessed in the lot. Another clause allowed the seller to recover property specifically excluded but mistakenly left inside, provided it appeared on the attached exclusion schedule. They'll say the jig isn't a content or fixture, Cal said. They'll say it's a separate asset hidden by mistake. They can say it. Walter ran a finger down the list. They still have to explain why it was bolted through the trailer frame. Cal looked at the folded demand. And if they get an order, we obey it. We don't volunteer more than it says. Walter called Miriam Shaw, a commercial lawyer who had represented his shop during a supplier dispute. He did not ask her whether he had won. He told her the exact words on the bill of sale, described the fixture, and admitted what the stamped initials might mean. Miriam's first instruction was to make 2 copies of every sale document and store one off-site. Her second was to permit no inspection until both sides agreed on a written protocol. Her third was less comforting. A buyer could acquire physical property without acquiring patents, copyrights, trade secrets, trademarks, or the right to make commercial claims about its history. Ownership of steel and ownership of ideas were different questions. What if the ideas were my father's? Walter asked. Miriam paused. Then there may be a third question. Who authored the drawings? And what did his contract do with them? Walter knew almost nothing about that contract. Eli had worked on a secret racing program from 1974 through 1976 for a company called Vale Performance. Harrison Voss, Claire's father, had managed the money and later became publicly known as the designer of the Voss Experimental chassis. 3 prototypes had been built, tested privately, and then vanished from official records after the sanctioning body changed its rules. Magazine profiles credited Harrison with a geometry that appeared years later in successful short-track cars. Eli's name appeared nowhere. At home that afternoon, Walter opened the grey steel cabinet in his spare bedroom. It held Eli's tools, tax papers, military discharge, and 6 work notebooks. Walter had inherited them in 1991. He had read the personal pages many times and avoided the technical pages with equal consistency. Eli had been a patient teacher until anyone mentioned Vale Performance. Then he went quiet. The only time Walter asked why Harrison Voss took credit for the prototypes, his father had answered, "A man with payroll behind him gets printed. A man with a torch gets paid on Friday. If he's lucky." The third notebook covered 1974. Its first 40 pages contained ordinary repair jobs. Then the paper changed to graph stock. Eli had drawn a full-size fixture in reduced scale, with 4 towers, paired diagonal rails, and tapered pins. A note beside the pin detail read, "Flat inward so I can index by feel." The dimensions matched what Walter had seen within 1/8 of an inch, which was as close as a hand sketch allowed. At the bottom, Eli had written Project V. First bed. Keep originals until tool invoice closes. There was no invoice in the cabinet. Walter turned more pages. He found 3 chassis numbers, VXP1 through VXP3, each followed by a different wheelbase and suspension pickup revision. 2 pages had been cut out cleanly. On the stub of one, faint pressure marks remained. Walter laid a sidelight across the paper and saw fragments of writing pressed from the missing sheet. H. Says, sponsor wants his name only. No final check. Drawings remain MPT. MPT had been Mercer pattern and tool. The sole proprietorship, Eli, ran from a rented cinder block building after his day shift. It closed in 1978. Cal stood across the table, reading upside down. You knew he did more than weld those cars. I knew what he claimed. That's not the same answer. Walter shut the notebook. The old defensiveness came faster than reason. He was my father. I didn't need a court file to believe him. Cal nodded, but his expression did not soften. Maybe he needed you to look for one. That sentence followed Walter back to the shop. By 4 that afternoon, Miriam received notice that Voss Arrow had filed for a temporary restraining order. The company alleged that the jig was a unique prototype fixture, removed from storage without authorization when employees loaded the wrong trailer. It claimed the fixture embodied confidential measurements still used in current licensing work. The filing valued the physical jig at $250,000 and the associated intellectual property at more than $4 million. It asked the court to prohibit Walter from moving, altering, copying, disassembling, displaying, or using it. The claim contained one immediate problem. Voss Arrow attached an inventory sheet dated 6 weeks before the auction. The sheet listed VXP alignment bed. Location Archive Bay C. Walter's trailer had been parked in the outdoor yard for at least 11 years, according to its expired registration sticker and the moss on its north side. If the inventory was accurate, the company believed the jig was somewhere else. If the jig had been in the trailer all along, the inventory was false. Miriam found a second problem. The attached corporate history described the jig as designed in 1975 by Harris and Voss and built by outside shop labor. It did not identify Eli, even though his initials were stamped on the tool. The description came from a museum catalogue prepared only 8 months earlier. When Claire announced plans to donate the Voss Racing Archive to the Piedmont Museum of American Motion, that donation had not closed. The museum required verified provenance before accepting major technical artifacts. This isn't only about getting steel back, Miriam said. They need the steel to support the story they're donating. Walter asked whether that helped him. Miriam said it made the company more motivated, not necessarily less dangerous. The court issued a narrow preservation order just before 5. Walter could retain physical custody for 6 days, but he could not alter or move the jig. Both sides were allowed one neutral inspection under the supervision of a court-appointed mechanical engineer. The judge scheduled a hearing for the following Thursday. If Voss Arrow showed a likelihood that the fixture was excluded property or contained misappropriated secrets, the court could order it removed while the case proceeded. Walter spent that evening making a decision about the shop. He told both employees, Luis Ortega and Dean Pike, that the legal order restricted the center bay and might frighten customers. He offered to pay them through Friday, even if they wanted to seek steadier work. Dean, who was 63 and had raced against Walter in the 1980s, said he would be there at 7. Luis asked whether the trailer was the reason 2 customers had already cancelled. Walter said yes. Luis said, "Then I guess we need 2 more customers." The response should have comforted Walter. Instead, it showed him the cost spreading outward. The neutral inspection began Wednesday morning. Dr. Samuel Reed, a retired vehicle dynamics professor, arrived with calibrated measuring tools and no interest in anyone's family story. Nathan Cole represented Voss Arrow. Claire came with him. It was the first time Walter had spoken to her since the auction. She stood beside the open trailer and studied the exposed frame. "Mr. Mercer, I didn't know that was in there." "I believe you." Cole glanced at Claire, apparently unhappy with both statements. She continued, "That doesn't mean it was sold." Walter handed the inspection protocol to Dr. Reed. "That's why we're measuring before people start deciding." The engineer documented every weld, fastener, stamp, and layer of paint. The fixture was not merely resting in the trailer. 8 brackets had been welded to the trailer rails, and 2 cross members had been cut to accommodate its lower beams. At some point, someone had built the transporter around it. Dr. Reed identified 3 paint systems. The bottom layer on the jig was dark green lead enamel, common in the 1970s. A grey layer covered both jig and mounting brackets. The trailer frame carried the same grey beneath its later black coating. That meant the jig had likely been installed when the trailer was built or rebuilt, not tossed inside during recent loading. Then, Walter pointed to the locating pins. Under the protocol, he was allowed to explain observations, but not manipulate the tool. Dr. Reed measured the flats and recorded their orientation. Walter produced a high-resolution copy of Eli's notebook page, leaving the original with Miriam. Cole objected that an undated family notebook could be manufactured or altered. Dr. Reed agreed that the drawing alone did not establish date or authorship. He also noted that 4 dimensions corresponded within normal fabrication tolerance and that the unusual pin-flat sequence was identical. Claire leaned closer to the copy. For the first time, the certainty left her face. "My father drew those cars," she said. Walter did not answer, with the accusation Cal expected. "Maybe he drew part of them. My father drew this." Cole ended the exchange and asked Dr. Reed to inspect a small aluminum plate on the rear beam. The plate carried a Voss asset number, applied in 1999. Cole said it proved corporate ownership. Walter asked the engineer to record what lay beneath the plate, without removing it. Dr. Reed used an angled light and a mirror. A second set of stamped letters extended beyond its edge, M, P, T, 746. The measurable result came near noon. Dr. Reed entered the fixture's key coordinates into a computer model and compared them with a Voss Experimental drawing supplied by Cole. 11 primary points matched, but the corporate drawing was revision D, dated February 1976. Eli's notebook showed the same points in an entry dated September 1974, along with 2 early positions later crossed out. The neutral engineer would not authenticate the dates, but he stated for the record that one document appeared to show a development sequence, while the other showed a finished configuration. Cole closed his file. Claire remained looking at the fixture. "What do you want, Mr. Mercer?" Walter could have said the building note, a settlement, or his father's name in a museum. Instead, he said the one thing he had not fully admitted to himself. "I want to know why both our fathers left us a fight instead of an answer." Claire looked as if he had accused her personally. "My father left records." "Then let's read all of them." She refused. The Voss private archive was held by a family trust and had not been opened to outside researchers. She said Walter could litigate the trailer, but he would not use the dispute to pry through her father's private papers. Cole added that any historical inquiry had no bearing on the simple recovery of mistakenly included property. Miriam disagreed. If Voss Arrow claimed ongoing proprietary rights based on Harrison's authorship, it had placed that authorship in issue. She asked for the original project contracts, purchase orders, payment ledgers, drawings, inventory transfers, and documents supporting the museum provenance statement. Cole said the request was premature. By the time they left, Walter understood the shape of the coming pressure. Voss Arrow would try to make the case small when discussing the sale and large when discussing the value. It was an unwanted piece of separate property when the bill of sale applied, but a unique vessel of $4 million in technical rights when the court considered harm. Walter would have to force both descriptions into the same room. That night, Cal found the first independent trail. He did not search racing magazines. He searched county property records for Mercer Pattern and Tool. The business had filed a mechanics lien against Vale Performance in March 1976 for unpaid design and tooling work. The online index showed the parties and amount, $4,800, but not the underlying papers. The original file had been transferred to county archives on microfilm. Walter remembered the amount. It was roughly what Eli had owed on their small house when Walter finished high school. He also remembered the summer his father sold a restored Ford coupe and told the family the shop had suffered a bad account. No one had said the account belonged to Vale. The next morning, Walter and Cal went to the archive together. The clerk brought them a roll of microfilm and showed them the reader. Walter advanced through deeds, Leah, and releases until the Vale filing appeared. Eli's affidavit stated that Mercer Pattern and Tool had designed and fabricated one universal chassis fixture and 3 prototype frames under Purchase Order 1472. It said Vale had paid the material deposit and 2 progress draws, but withheld final acceptance after taking possession. Attached was a 1-page terms sheet. Tooling would become Vale's property upon final payment. Original drawings and calculation sheets remained the property of Mercer Pattern and Tool unless transferred by separate written assignment. The file contained no release of the lien, Cal whispered. Then, Grandpa may have owned the jig when he died. Walter kept reading. On the final frame was a response signed by Harrison Voss. Harrison disputed the balance, alleging that the fixture required correction and that Vale employees had contributed substantial design work. He did not claim sole authorship. He called the fixture the cooperative Mercer Voss development bed. The phrase was dry, almost bloodless. To Walter, it sounded louder than any confession. Harrison's own sworn response contradicted the museum catalogue. The corporate history and 40 years of magazine profiles. Walter printed the documents, paid $12, and carried them outside in a brown envelope. On the courthouse steps, Cal asked what he planned to do if the papers proved Eli owned everything. Find out whether the final payment was made. And if it wasn't, Walter looked down at his father's signature. Then, I find out why he let them keep it. At the Thursday hearing, Nathan Cole tried to separate the old lien from the modern sale. He argued that even if Eli had once disputed payment, the fixture had remained in Vale's and then Voss's possession for nearly 5 decades. The company had tagged it, insured it, transported it, and listed it as an archive asset. Any lien had expired long ago. Any contract claim had died with the old business. More important, a race trailer sold for scrap could not reasonably include a historically unique research tool that neither buyer nor seller knew was concealed under the floor. Miriam did not claim the old lien was still enforceable. She used it to challenge Voss Arrow's clean ownership story. Then, she returned to the sale. The company had written the contract, inspected the lot, invited bids, and transferred all interest it possessed in attached fixtures and unscheduled contents. The jig had been structurally integrated into the trailer for decades. Voss could have reserved unknown archive property, she said, but it had not. A sophisticated seller could not call an omission obvious only after learning the omitted asset might be valuable. The judge asked Walter one question. Did you know or suspect this fixture was under the floor before you bid? No. Ma'am. Would you have bid more if you had? Walter considered giving the easy answer. I wouldn't have known what to bid. I knew the workmanship when I uncovered it. I didn't know the law or the history. That answer mattered. The judge denied Voss Arrow immediate possession. She preserved the restrictions for 30 days. Ordered expedited exchange of the project and sale records, and required the jig to remain secured at Walter's shop unless both parties agreed to neutral storage. She made no final ruling on ownership. She also warned Walter that possession did not authorize him to reproduce proprietary drawings, publish technical data, or market the fixture as an authenticated Voss prototype. To Cole, she said Voss Arrow could not use a trade secret label to conceal information already disclosed in public historical claims. Outside the courtroom, reporters from 2 racing websites waited beside the steps. Someone at the auction had posted a photograph of the lawyer's vehicles outside Mercer's shop. Cole told Claire to say nothing. Walter followed Miriam's advice and gave one sentence. The court protected the property while the documents catch up with the steel. Cal thought it was the best thing his father had said in years. Walter thought it sounded too polished and regretted it before reaching the truck. The temporary victory cost him 3 customers by Monday. One owned a valuable vintage car and did not want it near a disputed artifact. Another worried that reporters would photograph a private restoration. The third simply disliked trouble. The empty hours exposed how close the shop already was to the edge. Walter showed Cal the balloon note and the reserve balance. After payroll, insurance, and steel orders, they had enough cash for 26 days. Cal read the numbers twice. When were you planning to tell me? When I had a solution. That's what Grandpa said about everything. Isn't it? Walter pushed back from the desk. Your grandfather kept a roof over us and left you 50 years of silence to defend. You're doing the same thing with a bank statement. Cal walked into the fabrication bay before Walter answered. The comparison was unfair, which was why it hurt. Walter had spent half his life insisting that work should be judged by what it carried. He had hidden the load from the man working beside him. That afternoon, Walter called a meeting with Cal, Luis, and Dean. He explained the loan, the lost customers, and the litigation budget Miriam had estimated. He said he would not spend payroll money on a history fight. Dean offered to defer wages. Walter refused. Luis proposed a night shift on a fleet of utility racks another shop had turned down. Cal said they could make the deadline if Walter sold the large hydraulic tube bender and rented time elsewhere for specialty work. The bender had belonged to Walter for 23 years and generated some of the shop's best margin jobs. Selling it would make survival possible, but recovery harder. Walter listed it the next morning. That was the first price he paid for keeping the jig. Discovery produced 8 boxes of Voss records and nearly 12,000 scanned pages. Most were duplicates, invoices, photographs without dates, and corporate histories written long after the fact. The original purchase order 1472 was not included. Neither was proof of final payment. Cole stated that no more responsive documents had been found in the operating company's possession. The family trust remained separate, and Claire still refused access to Harrison's private archive. One scanned ledger showed a check issued to Mercer Pattern and Tool for $4,800 on April 2nd, 1976. Voss Arrow called that the final payment. Walter noticed the check number was written in blue ink, while the surrounding ledger entries were black. The check did not appear on the monthly bank reconciliation 2 pages later. Its number fell in a group marked void after the account was closed. Miriam requested the cancelled check or a bank image. Cole answered that records that old no longer existed. Walter then compared Eli's tax return for 1976. Mercer Pattern and Tool reported the veil balance as bad debt, not income. A tax return did not prove the money was never received, but it was a statement made when no museum, lawsuit, or valuable artifact was at stake. The Voss files held one more surprise. In 1998, the team converted the old jig into the floor of a transporter to carry 3 vintage chassis to promotional events. A work order instructed mechanics to secure legacy bed below false deck, preserve datum towers. The transporter was the same one Walter bought. A second note said the installation created a rolling exhibit base, but was discontinued when insurance inspectors objected to the added weight. Rather than remove the bed, the team parked the trailer. That explained how the jig disappeared from institutional memory. It also destroyed the wrong trailer story. Employees had not loaded the jig by accident before the auction. Voss management had deliberately installed it 27 years earlier, then failed to trace it during liquidation. Cole changed tactics. He offered Walter $75,000 for the trailer and fixture, plus reimbursement of legal fees. The proposal required Walter to return every copy of Voss documents, make no public authorship claims, and acknowledge that the discovery conveyed no intellectual property. It also offered a small museum plaque naming Eli as a fabricator on the prototype program. Cal read the proposal in silence. $75,000 would fund operations for months, but not pay the building note. More than that, the word fabricator reduced Eli to the pair of hands described in the corporate catalogue. Walter sent back a counterproposal with no dollar amount. He asked for joint neutral review of the family archive, independent authentication of both sets of drawings, public correction of any unsupported sole authorship claim, and a preservation agreement preventing either side from selling or separating the jig and project records until provenance was established. If the evidence favored Harrison, Walter would say so. If it favored Eli, Voss would do the same. Claire rejected it within an hour. She called Walter personally that evening. Her voice was controlled, but the effort showed. You're asking for my father's private letters, his medical notes, his family correspondence. You don't get to turn one bad auction list into a search of his life. I asked for project records reviewed by a neutral archivist. The archive isn't a litigation warehouse. Then, stop using it as proof when no one else can read it. She told him her father had financed the project when no bank would touch it. He recruited drivers, negotiated track access, and took responsibility when a test failed. Design was not only marks on steel. It was deciding what the car had to do and risking the money to find out. Walter said he did not dispute any of that. He disputed the word only. You want me to call him a thief? Claire said, no. I want you to stop calling him the only man in the room. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Claire made her own accusation. Eli had waited until after Vale collapsed to preserve a private story. She said, he never sued to judgment, never demanded the prototype frames, and never published his claim. Harrison had built a company in public, while Eli left suggestive notes in a cabinet. Maybe your father preferred grievance to scrutiny. Walter's grip tightened around the phone. He wanted to tell her what Eli had sacrificed, though he did not yet know. He wanted to protect a man who had refused to protect his own record. Instead, he said, that's possible. It's why both archives have to be opened. The call ended without agreement. 3 days later, the shop's tube bender sold for $48,000. $11,000 less than Walter had paid for it, used. He watched the buyer chain it to a flatbed. The empty rectangle on the shop floor looked larger than the machine ever had. The following Friday, a long-time customer arrived with 6 sprint car cages Walter normally would have bent in 2 days. Renting another shop's machine would erase the margin and miss the customer's deadline. Walter had to turn the work away while Luis wiped 6 job numbers from the scheduling board. The customer shook Walter's hand before leaving, which felt worse than anger. The empty rectangle was no longer a symbol. It had cost them a job they could count. The next evidence came from a place neither family controlled. In the 1970s, Vale Performance's insurer required engineering submissions for private high-speed tests. Walter found the insurer's successor listed in the discovery records and sent a formal archive request. The company had destroyed ordinary claims files, but its historical safety reports had been donated to the Carolina Transportation Collection at a state university. The collection's catalog mentioned 3 Vale prototype inspections. Walter, Cal, and Miriam visited the collection on a Tuesday. An archivist brought out acid-free folders but did not interpret them. The first report described VXP1 and included a chassis plan initialed H, V, for program approval, and E, M, for fixture datum release. The second documented a cracked rear pickup after a rough surface test. A corrective sketch redrew the load path and bore Eli's full drafting signature. Harrison had signed beneath it, approved for prototype 2. The third report listed both men under design responsibility. Harrison for vehicle specification and Eli for structural layout and manufacturing geometry. Tucked behind the reports was a contact sheet of black and white photographs. One showed Eli standing at the fixture with a chalk line in his right hand. Harrison stood beside him holding a clipboard. On the beam between them, clearly visible, were the 4 locating towers and the inward-facing flats. Another image showed 3 bare frames lined against a block wall. Each had a small oval opening in the left rear rail. A feature Walter had never seen in any published Voss design. The insurer's report called that opening a witness port. Eli used it to inspect an internal sleeve after welding. The opening was not required for performance. It was a manufacturing signature, a way to verify that hidden reinforcement sat in the correct position. Cal photographed only what the archive allowed. If any of the 3 cars still exists, that port ties it back to the jig. Walter nodded. It ties construction back, not ownership. You always make the claim smaller. That's how you keep it true. The phrase became the rule for their search. Voss Arrow's museum inventory identified one surviving experimental chassis, displayed for years as the 1976 Voss Arrow 0. Its public photographs did not show the left rear rail. A second prototype had reportedly been destroyed in testing. The third was recorded as scrapped when Vale closed. Yet the 1998 trailer work order referred to 3 vintage chassis carried on the hidden bed. Either the work order used the word chassis loosely, or more than one prototype had survived. Miriam requested inspection of Arrow 0 and the transport records. Cole offered photographs selected by the company, but refused physical access, arguing that Walter had no claim to the car. Dr. Reed examined the photographs and found that several dimensions aligned with the jig, but he could not see the witness port or serial area. The refusal opened another question without closing the first. Meanwhile, Claire faced pressure Walter did not learn about until a business journal published it. The planned museum donation was part of a broader agreement between the Voss Family Trust and the Piedmont Museum. The trust would fund a new engineering wing with $12 million over 10 years. The central exhibit, called the Vision of Harrison Voss, would establish the provenance of patents, cars, drawings, and oral histories from the racing program. The museum's board had delayed final acceptance after learning of Walter's claim. Without acceptance by September 30th, a matching donor could withdraw $3 million intended for construction. Claire was not fighting only for her father's reputation. She was trying to keep a public project alive, honor pledges, and prevent the dismantling of an archive she had spent years gathering. Walter understood the pressure. He also understood why a small plaque for Eli seemed attractive to her. It would keep the exhibit title, The Donor Agreement, and Harrison's sole vision intact. The museum appointed an independent provenance committee led by a retired federal archivist named Pauline Grant. Pauline contacted both sides. She would not decide legal title, but the museum would accept no artifact or historical claim until her committee could verify the chain of custody and attribution. She asked Walter to submit copies of Eli's notebooks, the lien file, and the insurance records. She asked Claire for the family archive materials and the original Arrow 0 records. Walter agreed, subject to protective terms. Claire supplied the corporate files, but again withheld the family archive. The committee suspended the exhibit. That suspension raised the value of the conflict and lowered the value of compromise. Voss Arrow expanded its suit, alleging that Walter's statements could confuse collectors and damage the Voss name. Miriam countered for ownership of the steel and control of Eli's registered drawings. The law still separated the physical jig, the drawings, the useful geometry, and historical credit. There might be no single winner. Then why are we spending money like there is? Cal asked. Because they're demanding one story, Walter said. Maybe the correct result is that no one gets to own all of it. Cal had begun sleeping on the office couch during the utility rack job. He and Luis worked nights because the missing bender slowed every repeated bend. Walter rented machine time from a shop 40 miles away and hauled tubes back before dawn. Dean handled restorations around the restricted trailer bay. The shop met the rack deadline by 9 hours. The customer paid promptly and offered a second order. But Walter had to decline until he found permanent bending capacity. The victory kept the lights on and proved the cost of his choice every day. At the end of August, Walter received a letter from the Federal Copyright Archive. In 1975, Mercer Pattern and Tool had registered a set of 12 technical illustrations titled Universal Chassis Development Fixture and Modular Frame Studies. The registration identified Elijah L. Mercer as author and proprietor. The archive retained a deposit copy, because inspection required a formal request and fee. Walter authorized Miriam to obtain certified reproductions. When they arrived, sheets 1 through 9 matched the notebook and the physical jig. Sheet 10 showed the witness port. Sheet 11 compared the 3 prototype revisions. Sheet 12 was not a drawing. It was a typed authorship statement. Eli wrote that Harris and Voss established the project goals, secured funds and test access, and participated in decisions on wheelbase, engine placement, and driver packaging. Eli claimed authorship of the universal fixture, structural rail system, manufacturing sequence, and drawings. He described the work as a collaboration in vehicle development and a Mercer pattern and tool design in fabrication engineering. At the bottom appeared 2 signature lines. Eli had signed one. Harrison's was blank. There was no accusation of theft. There was a boundary. Miriam sent the registration and deposit copy to Cole, the court, and Pauline's committee. 2 hours later, Claire asked for a private meeting at Walter's shop without reporters. She arrived alone just before sunset. Walter showed her the fixture from behind the court-required barrier. He did not hand her the certified copy until she asked. Claire read the authorship statement twice. Her father's name appeared generously, more generously than Voss Histories had treated Eli's. She touched the blank signature line. He never signed it. She said, "We don't know if he saw it. You could say he refused." "I could. I can't prove it." Claire looked toward the empty space where the tube bender had stood. That machine was here at the inspection. It paid for the right to keep asking questions. She almost smiled, but the expression never formed. Claire told him the museum committee would not restart without the private project files. The family trust's co-trustee, her older cousin Stephen Voss, also chaired Voss Arrow's litigation committee. He opposed opening the records and warned that unrelated business and personal material could leak. Claire could petition under the trust agreement, but doing so would cause a public family dispute and might remove her as archive chair. Walter said, "That's your bender." She looked at the empty floor again and understood. Before leaving, Claire offered a new settlement. Voss would pay $1.2 million. Buy the fixture. Name Eli as co-developer in the museum. and license the drawing set from the Mercer estate. The exhibit title would remain The Vision of Harrison Voss. The settlement would be confidential, and neither side could characterize the exact division of authorship beyond agreed plaque language. It was enough to pay the building, replace the bender, fund Cal's future, and let Walter retire if he chose. It offered more credit than Eli had ever received. Miriam later said a practical client would take it. Walter asked Claire one question before responding. Would the public be allowed to see the insurer reports and the copyright statement? Selected documents. Selected by whom? The museum. With both families. And the missing project file. Claire's jaw tightened. That isn't part of the offer. Walter declined. Cal did not speak to him for 2 days. On the third morning, Cal left an envelope on the office desk. Inside was a written offer from a race team in Ohio. They wanted him as shop manager at nearly twice what Mercer Race Fabrication could pay. The job started October 1st. 1 day after the Voss Museum deadline and 2 weeks before the building note matured. Cal said he had not accepted. But he could not keep arranging his life around decisions Walter made alone. I agree Grandpa deserves his name. Cal said, I don't agree that every dollar attached to compromise is dirty. Walter told him the offer had not been dirty. It had been incomplete. Then negotiate the incomplete part. I did. No. You asked for everything and called it a principle. Walter looked toward the closed center bay. If we take their wording, the evidence disappears back into private boxes. 20 years from now, someone trims the plaque. And we're right here again. Cal asked what remained of the shop in 20 years if they lost the building now. Walter had no answer that did not sound like a slogan. Cal returned to the utility rack order and kept working. But the offer sat between them. Miriam's next call made the physical danger immediate. Voss Arrow had asked the court to move the jig to a bonded warehouse, arguing that Walter's financial distress increased the risk of creditor seizure. The filing quoted the business journal and a public financing statement on the shop equipment. It said the restricted bay was not a proper archival environment and that the trailer roof still leaked. Walter felt the insult before he saw its logic. His shop was dry, locked, and insured. Yet he had listed major equipment. And a valuable disputed object sat inside a business, approaching a loan deadline. Claire's lawyers were using his honesty about the shop as evidence against his custody. Miriam said they could fight the move and probably lose. Or negotiate conditions. Walter shows condition. The jig and trailer would be stored together in a climate-controlled motorsports warehouse operated by the county's court contractor. Neither party could access them alone. The transfer would use a lifting plan approved by Dr. Reed because the fixture formed part of the trailer structure. Voss would pay storage without prejudice to ownership. Walter would retain both keys to the original coupler lock in a sealed evidence envelope. A small detail with no legal power but great personal meaning. The move took place on a grey Monday under court supervision. Cole had hired a heavy wrecker. Its operator planned to pull the trailer by the rear frame because the tongue appeared weak. Walter stopped the operation. The hidden jig added nearly 3,200 pounds between the rails. While years of water had weakened the rear crossmember, a rear pull could twist the very evidence both sides were ordered to preserve. Cole accused him of delay. Dr. Reed inspected the frame and agreed with Walter. They brought in a lowboy, supported the trailer at 6 marked points, and lifted it level. During the process, a loose section of outer belly pan sagged near the front. No one removed it. But Dr. Reed's camera recorded lettering on the covered beam, property of M. P. T. pending acceptance. The words had been hidden beneath the trailer conversion. Untouched since 1998, and likely much older. Cole insisted the paint inscription might have been added at any time. Walter agreed. He asked only that samples be taken under the neutral protocol. A coatings laboratory later found the lettering between the original green enamel and the grey installation coat. The pigment and binder were consistent with industrial marking paint sold in the mid-1970s. No laboratory could identify the hand that wrote it, but the sequence proved the statement existed decades before Walter's purchase. Claire's company responded by producing a 1977 internal asset ledger that listed the fixture as Vale property. Beside it was a notation. Dispute resolved by H.V. Cole argued that corporate possession, the asset ledger, insurance, and decades without a claim outweighed a painted reservation. The notation suggested a settlement whose documents had been lost. Walter did not dismiss it. Resolved can mean paid, he told Cal. It can also mean they waited him out. The ledger pushed Pauline Grant's provenance committee toward a formal evidentiary session. She scheduled it for September 27th at the museum. Open to donors, historians, and the public. Each family could present authenticated materials and witnesses. The committee would issue a written recommendation on attribution, artifact, acceptance, and whether the new engineering wing could proceed under its proposed name. That session would not decide the lawsuit. It would decide which history a respected institution was willing to display. Walter needed to understand the words dispute, resolved. The old county file showed no release. Eli's bank records showed no final payment. The corporate ledger said, something happened in 1977. Walter returned to the steel cabinet and examined every page after the lien entry. He found dates of ordinary jobs, a notation that the rented shop had closed, and one line written across an otherwise blank page, met H. At Red Lantern. Took my name back. Lost the work. The Red Lantern had been a diner near the old industrial park. It closed before Cal was born. Walter remembered waiting in his father's truck outside it one evening when he was 12. Two men argued in a booth near the window. One was Eli. The other wore a light overcoat and drove a silver Buick. Walter had forgotten the scene because nothing dramatic happened. His father came back to the truck, placed a long envelope behind the seat, and drove home without speaking. Walter had used that same truck through high school. Eli sold it in 1980. The envelope was gone. Memory could not tell him what it contained. He wrote down the recollection anyway, including its limits. Miriam told him not to build a claim on it. Pauline's committee would treat childhood memory as context, not proof. Walter appreciated the warning. Every honest boundary strengthened what remained. Cal located the old Vale attorney's probate inventory, but his files had been destroyed. Dean remembered a welder named Arthur Bell, who worked at Vale. But Arthur had died in 2006. Walter contacted Arthur's widow, who found photographs, but no contracts. One photograph showed Eli and Harrison shaking hands beside VXP2. On the back, Arthur had written, after the rough track fix, both stubborn devils finally agreed. It proved cooperation, not settlement. The search became slower just when the deadline demanded speed. That was when a racing podcast published a distorted version of the story. Its host said Walter had found a secret $1 million car factory beneath a trailer floor, rejected a 7-figure solution, and was suing Claire for stealing his father's patents. The settlement amount had never been public. The clip called Walter a profit seeker and drew hundreds of comments. Then one of Walter's restoration customers forwarded Cal an email from Voss Arrow's outside publicist, warning that shops doing business with Mercer could be pulled into subpoenas and document searches. The email repeated the podcast's exact phrase, seven-figure solution, and named Stephen Voss's litigation committee as the approving source. The customer withdrew his car. Luis erased another month of work from the board. Claire said she had not authorized the campaign and ordered the publicist to stop using the trust's name. Stephen's committee refused to retract the warning. Claire then issued a statement defending Harrison as the documented founder and creative leader of the prototype program. It acknowledged that skilled contractors, including Eli Mercer, contributed fabrication services, but did not mention the copyright registration or insurer reports. Walter could have answered publicly. Miriam advised one correction limited to facts. He declined even that and asked Pauline to publish the committee's evidence rules instead. If I win a shouting contest, we still don't know who drew the jig, he said. His restraint cost him attention, but gained him a witness. A retired Voss accountant named Martin Hale saw the podcast and contacted Miriam. He had joined the company in 1993, long after the prototype program, and knew nothing about authorship. He did know the 1998 archive conversion. Harrison had personally ordered the old fixture preserved under the false floor. Martin remembered asking why they were spending money to carry a piece of obsolete steel. Harrison answered, "Because it is the only witness neither family can edit." Martin had included the phrase, "in a budget memo." His retained copy was not enough by itself. So Miriam found the same memo among Voss's scanned records. Overlooked because it was coded under promotional transport. The sentence was there. It showed Harrison considered the jig evidence of a two-family dispute. It also showed he preserved rather than destroyed it. The discovery complicated Walter's judgment of Claire's father. A man hiding theft would not usually call the object a witness and spend money protecting it. A man planning to correct the record might. So might a man preserving leverage. Harrison's motive remained uncertain. But the corporate story of uncontested sole authorship became harder to defend. Cal, not Walter, found the way into the private record. Claire's earlier trust affidavit quoted a clause permitting limited disclosure when sealed material was necessary to protect an archive asset from legal loss. Cal drafted a one-page proposal, 6 boxes labeled Veil, Prototype, Mercer, and Archive Transport, review by Pauline, unrelated material kept sealed, every project document logged whether it helped Mercer or Voss. He sent it through Miriam without asking Walter to approve the language. Claire invoked the clause that evening. Stephen sought an emergency hearing to block her and threatened removal and personal liability. The trust court adopted Cal's narrow protocol and allowed Walter, Cal, Claire, Pauline, and counsel to attend the review under a confidentiality order. For the first time, the next step in the family dispute had not been chosen by either father, while the archive review was being scheduled. Walter faced his own deadline. The bank declined to extend the building note without a principal reduction of $110,000. The lawsuit made the shop harder to value, and the missing tube bender reduced equipment collateral. The lender gave him until October 15th. Exactly the date in the original note. It would accept no promise based on a settlement that did not exist. Walter owned one asset outside the shop that could cover most of the reduction. It was a 1970 Torino short-track car he and Eli had built when Walter was 19. The car had never won a major race. It mattered because its cage carried the first clean, continuous weld Walter ever made. Eli had left the slightly uneven bead visible, instead of grinding it smooth. A sound weld doesn't need makeup. He had told him. The car had remained in Walter's garage through marriage, divorce, lean years, and 2 offers from nostalgia racers. Cal found him removing the dust cover. Don't. The building carries 4 people's work. This carries mine. It carries his, too. That's why someone will pay for it. Cal said the $1 million settlement could have protected both. Walter did not argue. He placed the old logbook on the roof and told Cal the part he had never said aloud. When Eli died, Walter found a draft letter addressed to Harrison. In it, Eli admitted he should have brought the dispute into the open while the records were fresh. He wrote that he stayed silent first because he needed work. Later, because he was ashamed of staying silent. And finally, because public credit after so many years felt like begging. Walter had destroyed the draft in anger. Cal stared at him. You destroyed evidence. A draft with no signature and no proof it was sent. Yes. Why? Because I thought he was choosing an old fight over the family again. I was 30. The shop was failing. Your mother was pregnant with you. I didn't want to inherit his grievance. Cal looked toward the race car. But you did. I inherited his way of hiding it. Walter said that was why he could not accept confidential credit now. The decision was not only about honoring Eli. It was about correcting what both men had done with silence. Then he gave Cal every financial password. Supplier obligation. Loan, document, and pending estimate. If Cal left for Ohio, he would leave with the full truth. If he stayed, no problem would be protected from him again. Cal did not forgive the decisions immediately. He did something more useful. He asked to see the Ohio offer, called the team owner, and negotiated a 2-week extension. Then he helped Walter prepare the Torino for sale. A Tennessee motorsports collector named Everett Sloan bought the car for $94,000. He knew exactly why Walter was selling and did not lower his offer. Walter used $88,000 for the building note and kept $6,000 to rent a bender. Cal arranged a small equipment loan for the remaining principal reduction. Backed by the utility rack contract rather than the disputed artifact, the bank approved the structure conditionally. The shop would survive if it met 2 production milestones before October 15th. Walter watched the Torino leave on a closed trailer. The loss did not feel noble. It felt like an empty garage and a sound he would never hear from the driver's seat again. That made it a real cost, not a gesture. Pauline refused to summarize the Voss review in a report. She had the 6 boxes rolled into the museum's windowless conservation room and broke the numbered seals with Walter. Cal, Claire, Miriam, Cole, and Stephen watching. A camera recorded the table. No one could carry out a page. No one could later claim a helpful document had appeared without a chain of custody. The first box established Harrison's real achievement. His original proposal conceived a modular program that could test 3 configurations on 1 manufacturing bed. He defined the business goal: budget, drivers, and test schedule. In the margin beside the proposed fixture, he had written, Eli says 1 bed can hold all 3 if datums float independently. Have him design. Walter read it twice and slid it toward Claire. Program was his. He said. Bed wasn't. The second box held purchase order 1472. Tooling title passed upon final payment. Drawing rights required a separate assignment. The responsibility sheet placed vehicle requirements and test approval with Harrison. Fixture design and structural detailing with Mercer pattern and tool. Cal opened his laptop and began building 2 columns. Not one who decided. And who? Drew. In the third box. Pauline found the check from the corporate ledger still attached to its voucher. A red stamp crossed its face, void. The note beneath it said Mercer had refused a conditional tender that required him to assign the drawings and accept sole Voss credit. Behind it lay the red lantern draft. Eli had crossed out those two conditions and written, "Pay the invoice. Name the work. Or keep the debt." Neither man had signed. Cole said an uncashed check did not settle modern title. Miriam agreed. Stephen looked irritated by the agreement. He told Pauline they had found a contract dispute, not permission to dismantle his uncle's public legacy. Cal turned his screen so everyone could see the two columns. "No one's dismantling it," he said. "We're taking one oversized word and putting the work back underneath." The next folder held Harrison's sponsor memo. The sponsor did not want an outside fabricator, named as a technical lead. Harrison wrote that the cars belonged to Vale as a program. But the bed and structural drawings remained Mercer's until clean payment. A 1998 transport order later directed staff to preserve the jig with both families' markings and identified 3 surviving frames: Arrow 0, Shop, Mule, and a cutaway training chassis. The official histories had said 2 were destroyed. The last box appeared empty except for a thin, unmailed envelope caught beneath a cardboard liner. Harrison had addressed it to Eli in 1989. He proposed donating the fixture and surviving frames to a technical college under both names. He admitted that letting magazines call him sole designer had been useful, incomplete, and increasingly dishonest. Then he blamed Eli for rejecting every compromise and asked for one final meeting. Eli died 2 years later. There was no evidence the letter ever left Harrison's desk. Walter sat with both hands flat on the table. The letter did not make Harrison innocent or Eli easy. It showed 2 proud men waiting for the other to return first. Cal closed his laptop. "Then we don't wait." Stephen told Claire that the documents were still sealed. They could settle the steal privately, keep the $12 million museum pledge intact, and revise a footnote without surrendering the vision of Harrison Voss. If she released the letter and voided check, the matching donor could walk. The board could remove her. And every headline would reduce her father's work to a scandal. Claire asked Pauline what the evidence required. "Retire the sole creator claim." Pauline said, "Name the functions. Preserve the disagreement." "I can't tell you what that costs." Cal turned his laptop back around. His draft credited Harrison with conception, funding, program direction, vehicle requirements, and test approval. It credited Eli with the universal fixture, structural layout, drawings, and fabrication process. Shared decisions remained shared. Walter had not seen the page before that moment. Claire read it in silence. Then she signed an instruction to her trust council, supporting release of the 6 core documents and withdrawal of the sole name exhibit title. "If the wing requires a false title," she said. "We don't have a wing." Stephen filed to stop her before the boxes left the room. At the emergency hearing, Claire appeared with separate trust counsel, while Cole represented the company committee. Walter waived any claim to unrelated private material. The judge allowed the 6 project documents to be used at the museum session, with account numbers and unrelated names redacted, but reserved every physical title question for trial. Outside, Cole warned Claire that the board would vote on her removal. She answered, then put the vote on the record. Walter understood the cost now. She was not giving away an unwanted trailer. She was risking control of the institution built around her family name. The provenance session filled the museum's central hall on September 30th. Pauline had moved it there because the committee room held only 40 people. Retired racers sat beside donors, machinists, historians, reporters, and students from 3 technical schools. The court contractor delivered the trailer on the lowboy before dawn. Dr. Reed supervised 6 supports beneath the frame, and museum staff raised 2 sections of the rotten floor on temporary hinges. Visitors could see the long green fixture exactly where Walter had found it. With the folded towers still inside and the newer Voss asset plate crossing the older MPT stamp, Pauline began with a rule. The committee was not deciding which family deserved admiration. It was deciding what claims the museum could support with evidence. She divided the questions into physical custody, object history, drawing authorship, vehicle program responsibility, and public attribution. No single answer would be allowed to swallow the others. Dr. Reed explained the steel first. The fixture had been fabricated in the mid-1970s, modified during prototype development, and structurally integrated into the trailer during the 1990s. The locating pin sequence, project stamps, coatings, and dimensions connected it to Eli's registered drawings. The Voss asset plate and installation records showed long corporate possession. The tool was not a loose object accidentally placed in the trailer during liquidation. It had been a deliberate, preserved part of the transporter for 27 years. Pauline then displayed the sale documents. The auction packet transferred the trailer with permanently attached fixtures and unscheduled contents. The VXP bed appeared on no exclusion schedule. Voss had possessed records proving the tool was under the false deck, but its modern inventory placed it in a non-existent archive Bay C. The committee did not interpret the contract as a court would. It found that Walter's discovery resulted from a documented failure in Voss's own asset control, not concealment or bad faith by the buyer. Nathan Cole was allowed to respond. He said the auction language could not erase 5 decades of ownership conduct, and that a historically important object should not transfer because of an inventory mistake for less than the price of its scrap steel. He also said Vale and Voss had carried the cost. Insurance, storage, testing, and public risk of the prototype program. Harrison's leadership had been real, continuous, and indispensable. A subcontractor's drawings did not make him author of the entire car. Walter agreed with the final sentence. The simple response unsettled people expecting a fight. Pauline asked him to explain. Walter stood beside the open trailer in a clean blue work shirt. He did not call Eli the sole designer. He said Harrison decided what the program needed, found the money, assembled the drivers, approved tests, and accepted business responsibility. Eli devised the adjustable bed, drew the structural rails, solved how 3 frames could be constructed from common reference points, and controlled the manufacturing sequence. Some suspension and packaging decisions were shared. The 3 cars were the result of a program. The jig and drawing set were Eli's authored work, unless a clean transfer proved otherwise. My father wanted the word designer, Walter said. Mr. Voss wanted the word designer. That word got so large it hid the verbs. The records give us better verbs. Pauline showed the 6 released documents in the order they had been found. The voided check proved the ledger entry was not payment. The Red Lantern draft proved the money had been conditioned on an assignment and sole credit. Harrison's own memo said the bed and drawings remained Mercer's until clean payment, while his last letter admitted the public story had become dishonest. Cole made the strongest remaining answer: an unsent letter was not a public correction. An old unpaid invoice did not automatically decide title after half a century. and Eli's drawings did not make him author of Harrison's entire program. Walter agreed again. He wanted the auction contract honored. Eli's sheets controlled by Eli's estate, and each man's actual work named. Nothing larger. Claire then carried out the decision she had signed in the archive room. She placed Harrison's letter beside the fixture and told the audience that her father had built the program but had not built it alone. She withdrew the vision of Harrison Voss, accepted Cal's function-by-function credit framework, and asked the museum to publish the 6 documents. When Stephen said she could not bind the company's litigation committee, she answered, "Then, the committee can vote against accuracy in a recorded meeting. The trust will not." Pauline's panel rejected the sole name title and authenticated Eli's fixture, structural drawings, and fabrication process alongside Harrison's program conception, financing, vehicle requirements, and test leadership. It refused the artifacts until title was settled and the core records remained public. The matching donor preserved its funds on a new condition. The wing had to include a technical archive and apprentice program, governed by evidence, rather than a family name. The Voss Arrow board removed Claire from its litigation committee the next morning. Then, authorized settlement, after the insurer warned that the auction records and voided check made continued litigation dangerous. Cole's instructions changed. He no longer demanded surrender. He negotiated clauses. The settlement took 12 days. Voss Arrow released all claims to the trailer and fixture. Eli's reopened estate assigned any remaining shop interest to Walter, closing both possible title chains. Walter kept the registered drawings and licensed them to the museum for education. Voss paid stabilization and Walter's documented legal costs. Not a fortune. And both sides adopted the function-by-function credits. The 6 core documents and their source guide would remain public. In the courthouse hallway, Miriam returned the 2 coupler lock keys. Walter gave one to Claire. "One family shouldn't be able to close it again," he said. The shop met its production milestones on October 13th. The bank accepted the principal reduction and refinanced the building balance over 7 years. Cal declined the Ohio job only after Walter offered him 49% of Mercer race fabrication, full access to the books, and equal authority over major debt. "Why 49? Cal asked. Walter said, "Because I'm still learning." Cal countered with 50. Walter accepted. They rented bending time for 6 months and rebuilt the reserve before replacing the machine. The museum renamed the project the Voss Mercer Prototype Workshop. Harrison's name led the section on program vision and testing. Eli's led fixture design and structural fabrication. Another panel named the drivers, welders, mechanics, bookkeepers, and inspectors the records could support. Walter loaned the trailer and jig to the museum for 15 renewable years, with the old coatings, stamps, and dents preserved. Retained ownership gave Cal's generation a lawful voice if the access terms were ever abandoned. Restoration would make it prettier, Claire said during the final conservation meeting. Walter looked at the words beneath the asset plate and answered, "Pretty is how the argument got covered the first time." At the public opening, 2 floor panels remained raised over the green fixture. Claire named Harrison's program leadership and Eli's authored engineering before correcting the sole designer claim made under her authority. Walter held one locating pin, so its hand-ground flat caught the light. "Legacy isn't defending a man from every hard fact," he said. "It's leaving enough facts visible for the next generation to make a better decision." There was applause. But it was not the ending. The ending came months later in Walter's shop. The empty bender space held a smaller fixture Cal had designed for an electric club racing chassis. Cal set the requirements. Luis modeled the towers. And Walter devised the indexing system. Before the title plate was drilled, they divided it into 4 signature boxes: program specification, fixture design, structural analysis, and fabrication approval. Each person signed the work he had done. The customer paid the tooling invoice before pickup, and one readable page stated who owned the steel, who owned the drawings, and what public credit could be used. Walter filed a copy in the office, and another in a fireproof cabinet Cal could open. Memory lies easiest when the paperwork is weak, he said. Then, father and son bolted the signed plate where no future flaw could hide it. Nothing in the shop looked legendary. Everything important was visible.